Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kidlit Social. I'm Laura Backus, publisher of the Children's Book Insider newsletter and co-creator, host, whatever you want to call me, of writingblueprints.com. So welcome. For those of you who are new to us on the Kidlit Social or who are curious about our newsletter, Children's Book Insider, we have a special offer for you for $5 a month, writeforkids.org/CBI. And you can get a subscription to the newsletter. It comes once a month in your inbox. It's about 20 pages every month. Lots of info on writing and publishing and navigating the business side of the Kidlit industry. Also, market information on what editors and publishers are looking for, and a special above the slush code every month for either an editor or an agent. You get to submit using this code, and your manuscript jumps over the slush pile and gets read first. That's awesome. And you have full access to our membership site, which is also part of your subscription and has 31 years worth of information on it. Jill, you can turn off your video for a moment if you want. I'll introduce you in just a second. Thanks. Now we get to celebrate. So I have two great celebrations today. Natasha Wing, our friend Natasha, is celebrating the book birthday today of her new biography, The Story of Eliza Hamilton, from Rock Ridge Press. And it's her first nonfiction chapter book, and it's getting great reviews, which is always something to celebrate. And I love that Eliza Hamilton is getting her own story told, finally. So congratulations, Natasha. You can see she's very excited. And Louise Tucker, self-published Gem and the Yumbos, a middle grade fairy fantasy, as an ebook on Amazon. So congrats, Louise. I love the cover. It looks really, really cool. And good luck with that. So I want to hear your good news. Send me an email, mail@writeforkids.org, and put celebrate in the subject line, and we'll feature your news on a future Kidlit Social. And no news is too small to share, and no celebration is ever too small. We want to celebrate every step of your journey with you. And so now I have a cool link of interest. This is from Nathan Bransford. He was a guest on this webcast a couple months ago. He's got a great blog of writing tips. And this new blog post, when describing characters, think more about capturing presence than details, is really, really interesting. It's about not getting bogged down in every little detail of your character, but picking one or two things that really gives the essence of who they are and sums it up really beautifully. And then the reader gets to fill in the gaps in their own mind. So I have a direct link to that article, bit.ly/essence of character, or you can go to his blog, nathanbradsford.com, and find it there. Now I get to introduce my guests. You saw that Jill was very excited to come on. So Lola Schaefer has published more than 275 books in the past 25 years with trade, school, library, and classroom publishers. Her first graphic novel for beginning readers, book one of the Sprinkles and Swirls series called A Fun Day at Fun Park, is now available from Ready to Read Graphics at Simon Schuster. And next year, her book Machines will come out from Greenwillow I thought I saw a date for that, from Greenwillow Books, illustrated by James Yang. And she also has 7 more books in the pipeline with 4 different publishers. So she's very busy. She's a writing consultant in elementary and middle schools, as well as a frequent presenter at writing conferences and workshops. And Jill Esbaum has written 17 fiction picture books for children, 24 nonfiction books, by my count anyway, and 3 titles in the Thunder and Cluck series from Simon Schuster's Ready to Read Graphics. And her picture book biography, Jack Knight's Brave Flight, How One Gutsy Pilot Saved the U.S. Airmail Service, which sounds really interesting, comes out from Calkins Creek next March. And Jill is also a teacher, and I think both ladies have editing services on their websites, so check those out. So ladies, please turn on your cameras and video and join me. Yay! Hey, hi Jill, and Jill, your mic is still muted, so you can unmute yourself.
Alrighty.
Yay. Good. Welcome. Thank you both for being here today. And I just think your collective output is so impressive. The two of you together could completely fill an elementary school library with all your books. You've written so many. It's just so impressive. So thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. And we're going to talk about easy reader graphic novels, which I love. So first, for those who are sort of new to what easy readers might be, can you give us a really brief definition of what they are and kind of the intended audience? Who are these books for? So Lola, I'll have you lead that one off for us.
Well, I think that easy readers were developed years ago because there was a need when a child was first becoming an independent reader to have something that was, first of all, entertaining, compelling for him or her, and that offered support so right away they could build up their capacity as a reader and they would experience success. So depending on the publisher and depending on the level of easy reader, they usually rely heavily on a lot of sight words, but they don't shy away from key vocabulary words. And quite often it's the illustrator who helps cue the reader as to what those words might be. If the child just can't recognize the word alone in the text, they can look to the illustration, and that gives them extra support. I'm really thrilled to be someone who writes these kinds of books because they're such a foundational piece to launch someone into becoming a lifelong reader.
Great. Jill, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that was a terrific answer, but one thing I want to tell people who are listening to give them a little confidence, I knew nothing about these when I started. I only wrote one because an editor I'd worked with before told me, she said, write something like Elephant and Piggy. I could use a funny series like that. No pressure. So
Okay.
I read it for the Elephant and Piggy. And so I wrote an all dialogue story, Thunder and Cluck. And it was about two or more times longer than Elephant and Piggy. But anyway, I sent that to her and her reply was, this is too Elephant and Piggy. And she passed. So that's why Thunder and Cluck went out into the wider world.
Okay, interesting. Well, we're going to show some pages from Thunder and Cluck as well as Sprinkles and Swirls, both series, in just a second here. But that's really interesting. Now, one sort of key difference before we move on between easy readers and picture books, I believe, now correct me if I'm wrong, is picture books are written so that the illustrator can add another layer to the story. Things can be happening in the illustrations that aren't in the words. With easy readers, do you want the illustrations, as the writer, do the illustrations more match the words because they are helping the reader understand the text? Or can there be that other layer going on in the illustrations? Jill, what do you think?
I just don't know if there's a lot of room for that, you know, on the page.
Right.
I haven't studied them enough to see that myself, to have seen that done.
Right. Yeah. My impression just from reading easy readers and picture books is that they are written a little differently in that way because their purpose is a little bit different. You know, picture books are really meant to be read out loud to a child. So Lola, you've written a lot of the easy readers. What do you think about that as far as the role of the illustrations to expand the story?
I think what you're saying, Laura, is definitely accurate. Although I have to say, I remember in my Mitten series that I did for I Can Read with HarperCollins, that illustrator added just tiny, just like Jill was saying, you don't have a lot of room here,
Sure.
but she added some tiny little extras. So when you have that critical reader, it's a great thrill for that child to see something else that's not exactly in the text, that adds a little humor maybe, or just a little bit more meaning. But you're absolutely right that a picture book is meant to be, on the whole, read to a child. And not that children don't read them independently, they certainly do, but they do have two different purposes.
Right. Okay, well, let me screen share again, and we'll look at some pages from these books. I want to talk a little more about the actual text, and sort of the word choices that you used, and the kind of words you focused on, because I'm sure a lot of people who want to write easy readers are very concerned about that. So, Jill, I'm going to start with you because you said you came to this knowing nothing, which is great. So here I have a page from the Sprinkles and Swirls on the left, and a page from Thunder and Cluck on the right. And these are level 1 easy readers, so they're really for kids who are really just starting to read on their own. And as we can see, there's a lot of one-syllable words here, or like I think Lola was calling them sight words. And then what I observe in these kind of books is there might be a new word that's introduced on the page, but it's repeated several times. Like in Sprinkles and Swirls, you have the word giant, and it's repeated several times. And I imagine that word is harder to read for kids because it's not really intuitive how you pronounce it from the way it looks. And then on Thunder and Cluck, we have the word doomed over and over, but also you have this word impossible, which is a pretty big word to throw in there, but it's surrounded by smaller words. So is this, and Jill, I'm going to have you answer first here, is this by design, the way the words look on the page? Do you focus mainly on one syllable words, or is this something you think about that much? Did it just kind of come out?
After Simon wanted the first Thunder and Cluck, I, in my backwards way then, looked at kindergarten and first grade words and typed out the whole word list so I'd have it in my head. That's kind of learner I am.
Yes.
And read it a few times. And I think that informed the later books, because then I had those in my head. Shorter, easier to sound out words. So impossible, I asked her if that was okay, and she said yes, as long as it's in a context that kids can figure it out. Plus, impossible is not a horrible word to sound
It's
out.
not that hard.
So,
No.
also, I did not know at first that these would be level 1. So yeah, I was really ignorant. Kind of how I roll.
That's all right. I love it.
I'm more careful about it now.
Okay. Yeah. So Lola, how about you? Were you very conscious of your word choices, or was that something that you went back and looked at after you had the story down?
Yeah, I can't have that be front and center when I'm writing, even though it is somewhat, the initial few drafts are all about writing an entertaining story. And then, just like Jill, I didn't know until our editor came back to me and said, well, these are going to be level 1s. And I said, well, then what kind of adjustments do I need to make? And so depending on the publisher, because it's quite different from publisher to publisher, our editor told me, well, there can be no contractions for this level 1. She didn't ask me really to change much vocabulary at all, but it is a thing where you really don't know until you start working with the artist as well, because you don't know about frames and how many frames and all of that. We can talk about some of that later.
Sure.
But your word choice, at least for me, there is a learning curve in writing these. But I think that people sometimes, I know the people that I coach every now and then, they get really worried about the word choice or the length of words. And I'm back there encouraging them, just write your story, write an entertaining story.
Mhm.
And then on the next draft or the draft after that, you can look more closely at language.
Sure. Yeah. I imagine too, if you are writing for an educational publisher, they might have stricter guidelines on the words you can use. I'm just assuming here because they might have leveled readers in a series that is going directly to the classroom, and they're maybe it's a phonics series and kids are learning separate sounds in each book or something like that. Whereas a trade publisher like Simon Schuster might have a little, give you a little more leeway. That's my guess. What do you think about that?
Lola, you have experience with both, so.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've never actually written the kind of book for the educational market that you just described, Laura, but I do them on nonfiction topics. And usually what they encourage you to do is they'll say in the glossary, you're going to have 6 terms, or in the glossary, you're going to have 8 terms, depending on who your intended audience is. And you know that those can be a little bit more difficult words, but they are just so important to the topic that they want the children to learn these terms in context. And so they don't really dictate, but they just give you these general guidelines to write within.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. Okay, so let's move on to the whole sort of ideas for the series as a whole and the characters. So I have a couple different, what I love about both of these books is very quickly we get a sense of who these characters are. They're both kind of friendship stories, or Sprinkles and Swirls. Are they siblings? They seem to have a sibling relationship to me.
Yes, in my mind, they're sisters, but
Yes.
who knows
Yes.
how the reader may or may not interpret that, but
Yeah.
that's how I have envisioned them.
Yeah. And very clearly, very early on, Sprinkles, at least in this first book, is the one who takes charge, who's like, we're going to go do this. And she's a little bit bossy, but you know, and so that was very evident pretty quickly. And then when we get to Thunder and Cluck, very, very distinct personalities between the two. This is from the first book, and Thunder is trying to be a very fierce dinosaur, and Cluck is not really having much of it here. And I love again how their personalities just came out so immediately with just a few spreads, and that was great. So when conceiving an idea for a series, do you have to think about what does the series hinge on? Is it the characters, or is there some other sort of hook or device that you have to come up with that's going to carry the series over several books? Lola, what did you think about in terms of developing this?
Well, I had never written a graphic book in any form before Sprinkles and Swirls. And when I was speaking with our editor, she told me that she would like to just bounce some ideas back and forth, or I could send some manuscripts. So I want all the writers out there to know that this doesn't just happen instantly. It takes a lot of back and forth work. I know that Jill's was an instant buy for those 2 wonderful characters, but it doesn't always happen that way. So I sent in some graphic chapters for different kinds of characters. And the editor was great. She would say, "Ooh, I like this, I like that, but this just isn't exactly what I want." And I knew, because, you know, I read voraciously, so I knew about the other kinds of characters that were being published in graphic format. And I thought, okay, it's got to be something a little distinctive, something that kids could really have fun with. So then I came up with the cupcake idea, and I wrote and wrote. And that's another thing that writers need to know, is that you do personally, you have to get to know your characters. And you do that through just lots and lots of drafts and playing with language. when I sent a final draft to our editor, all she wrote back was, "This is too delicious of an idea to pass on." And yes, I had a feeling that the cupcakes might grab her attention, but you just never know. And so you don't want to give up just because maybe your first two characters didn't grab someone's attention, or just like Jill said after she sent in hers, and to the one editor who asked her to write something similar, and they said, "Oh no, this is too similar." We just don't give up. You just keep playing with it. So I do think it's important to have unique characters.
Mhm.
And then again, they have to have some solid story elements. And when it's a graphic, you've got to have a lot of action. A
Mhm.
lot of scene changes need to be going on.
Mhm. Absolutely, and we can talk about that a little more in a minute. But you're right, and I think with any kind of easy reader, even if it's not a graphic novel, that action is important because you want to keep the pages turning when the kid is
As far as
working on
coming up
their
with
own.
books, I found that a little discouraging when I went to the library and got armloads of books. There were things like, robot alien mermaids conquer the space, disaster after disaster. And I'd go, okay, I cannot even try to write something like that. You have to write what feels natural to you.
Yes.
And luckily, this seemed to work for them. And one reviewer said it reminded her of old Warner Brothers cartoons. And I thought, yes, that's exactly where I'm coming from, and I'm
Good.
we got
Excellent.
that. But
Yeah.
that's what I know. That's what I know. That's how I grew up. And
Yeah. Well,
play to your,
and oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
no,
off there.
play to your strengths.
What I love about the Thunder and Cluck, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in just a minute, but there is a tone that's very funny, and just the back and forth between these two characters. It's like an old Warner Brothers cartoon or an old comedy duo or something. I love it, and just the very distinct personalities that I imagine that, well, 3 books so far, the 2 personalities just set you up so beautifully for all kinds of plots.
And they're
Because
just friendship stories.
they're just friendship stories, but each character is so different that they bring different strengths and weaknesses to each scenario, which is great, which is really great. Okay, so Jill, I wanted to have you start this next one off. So when you're creating the story for the easy reader, let's see. Oh, we talked already about action, lots of action. And also what I thought was really great, and I assume this is something the publisher came up with at the beginning of each book, there's instructions to the reader on how to read a graphic novel, which I thought is really smart because these kids might not know. And the characters actually explain it in their own personalities, which I love. But besides this kind of thing, are there other considerations for writing easy readers? We talked about action. Does the story have to take place in a very short time span, for example? Does the plot have to be fairly simple? Are there any other things to think about?
Yes and yes. I think they're very much like picture books, except they're not.
Mhm.
So you need one problem or one goal, and then it's the characters and the choices they make, the wrong choices, and the consequences of those. And you start writing to that, and before you know it, your word count, can be 1,000 words just like that. So
Mhm.
it's all in the personalities. It's always in the characters. For me, it starts with the characters. And yes,
Mhm.
one simple plot.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
how you get there. That's the fun.
Yeah, yeah. So, excuse me, Lola, you sent me a couple pages of your manuscript for us to see what it looks like. And because one of the things I was going to ask is, do you get to give illustration notes? Because so much of, in a graphic novel, so much of the plot cues come from the illustrations. So Lola, can you kind of walk us through this? a couple pages from your manuscript here.
But again, I would just like to warn everyone that your manuscript does not have to look like my manuscript. And what
Right.
works for one editor in one format may not appeal to another editor. So before I even do that, my big recommendation would be to find some of these easy readers or easy reader graphics that appeal to you and type them up. Just the way the text appears, to give you an idea of pacing and language. It's one thing to read it, but when you actually type the words and you triple space for a page turn, and you actually type the words the way they appear on the page, that helps you see what the manuscript looks like. And to me, that is just a really big help before you go to submit. So when we're picking up this story over here on the left hand, it says, why? I am up, up, up. And so we wouldn't know what was going on. And I could just leave that up to the illustrator. But in these, for me, I don't know about Jill, Savannah Allen, who's doing an amazing job with sprinkles and swirls, she really appreciates having guidelines. Does she have to stick to what I type there? Absolutely not. I am not trying to send her strict instructions, but for the text to make sense, I want her at least to know what I'm thinking, and then she can go from there. So I just said, sprinkles and the bike are airborne for quite a while, and she lands in a pond with a big splash. And so, you know, that's when all of a sudden Swirls comes in and says, and now you are down. And so now we see a very wet sprinkles and a very wet sprinkles and a dry Swirls in the grass watching others rehearsing, and some are singing, others are painting, and a few are dressed like clowns. And then Sprinkles says, oh, hear that? I do. And then we have more notes, and all I'm doing is setting the stage for what I am writing so that I can keep my text short and with a lot of energy, and knowing that the illustration will help carry the story. So on this, because this was from one of my earlier drafts, I have not done this, but typically at the top of every single page when I submit one to my editor, I would have the name Sprinkles over there on the left-hand column. So she would know that everything that is listed on the left is said by Sprinkles. I would have Swirls name up on top of the right-hand page. So both the editor and the illustrator would know, as they are thinking about panels, who is saying what. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but like I said, everybody does it completely different. And I am sure that Jill is going to tell us she doesn't do it anything like that at all.
I love seeing this. I love seeing how other people format. I, right under my title somewhere over on the left, I put Thunder's dialogue is in green and Cluck's is in black. So I just have them all on the left side, double spaced and triple spaced between scenes. Yeah, and one's green and one's black. And then I have Siobhan, and she told me, I couldn't believe it when I heard this the first time as a picture book writer. Now go back, I want to know all the details about facial expressions, body language, setting, you know, I want everything written in there, you know, in brackets. And I was like, really? That was like being set loose. So then I did that over on the right-hand side in brackets, in grayscale, I think a little bit like a darker grayscale, just so they know it wasn't dialogue. But that was the weirdest thing for a person who is primarily a picture book writer, to be able to say exactly what you want the pictures to look like. And then they give it to the illustrator, Miles Thompson, and I cannot stump the man. He can, anything I put them into, he gets it illustrated. It's just a blast. So
that's great.
I love this. Thank you for turning that in, Lola.
Yeah. But you know,
and I love that you do the two colors, because I actually thought about doing that, and I thought maybe they'll think that's weird or something. But now I know that I could do that if I want to.
It was just harder for me to set up the two columns, honestly. So that's what I said. Forget it. Just doing the colors.
Yeah, there you go. Well, and I think probably it's however it is clear to the person reading the manuscript, that's all that matters, whether you do it in columns or colors.
And
as
still,
long
look
as
how
the
much
person
white
reading
space
it-
is on the page. You
Mhm.
you can figure it out.
Sure, sure. But I have talked to other illustrators who have done graphic novels, and they have said the same thing, that they appreciate direction because so much of the plot is carried in the illustrations, and it's so important that they get the plot details right. I mean, you're not giving them a whole lot of detailed descriptive details about the landscape and the background. That's up to them, unless it's important to the plot. But I could see where they would appreciate that. Whereas, again, it's the difference between a graphic novel and a picture book. With picture book, you expect the illustrator to bring half the story and to bring some of their own interpretation to it.
Well, and you
Graphic
don't ever
novel,
want to step on their toes either.
sure, of course, of
But-
course. But I think that's great.
Could we
Okay.
answer Rita's question, Laura, that Rita just
Sure.
asked? She wanted to know if we number our pages. And I can tell you, Rita, that no, I never do that because again, in design, they're going to make the decisions about how many frames or, and sometimes the whole page is a frame, sometimes it's divided into 2 or 3. So
Mhm.
I personally don't. I just try to keep, since I've finished now book 3 and Jill has obviously as well, I try to keep them approximately the same length, but just in general terms, because I know that layout will be different.
Yeah. Now, when thinking in terms of length for these books, do you think in terms of, I have X number of scenes and I know that that's going to fill the book, as opposed to word count, because you're just writing dialogue, so the word count might not be a great guide for how long the book's going to be, or do you just sort of have a sense that it's the right length? Jill, let's have you answer this one first.
I think it's just you just have a feel for it after the first book.
Mhm.
It's going to be about 5 pages or whatever, 7 pages. And like Lola said, they're the ones really that decide if you're going to have 3 panels on this page or 2, or if
Sure.
you're going to have one big spread. Or so, the scenes are very clear. And like you said, you put three spaces between scenes, Lola, or however you said that. I do that
Yeah.
same thing. And then but within that, they can do whatever they want. They've got 64
Yes.
pages to fill with these. And it's really not my say what goes where.
Yeah. So 64 pages,
Mhm.
which is a lot longer than picture book writers are used to, as not word wise, but just the number of page turns. So that's why I was wondering, do you worry about having like, I need 30 scenes so that I'll have at least 32 page, spreads, or you just kind of get the feel for it after a while?
Yeah, you just kind of jump in and do it. And you keep your fingers crossed that you're pretty much on target, because there's always going to be just a little bit of dinking. Because maybe the illustrator decides for what she has or he has to draw that they want to break something up and that lengthens it, or vice versa, that they might
Right.
want to shrink something up.
Mhm.
So yeah, I agree with Jill. It's kind of just something instinctual at a point, and we give it our best shot and
Yeah.
send it in.
Cool. Do they ever come back to you during the process where it's being, I assume the illustrators storyboard it at some point. I'm just assuming maybe they don't, but do they ever come back to you and say, you know what, we're a little short or we're a little long. We need to cut a little bit, or we need to add a little bit more. Has that ever happened to you?
Not yet.
Not yet. I was just
Good.
going to say the same thing. It's just pure luck, but not yet.
Well, good. You must have good instincts then. That's awesome. Okay, so I just wanted to, before we get into some questions here in a minute, I just wanted to I want to show people kind of, these are both level 1 for this particular line of graphic easy readers. Now, level 1 might mean something different for another publisher than it does for Simon and Schuster. It's not consistent across the board, but for Simon and Schuster, this is level 1. But I want to show you the sort of one thing I love about easy readers is that the kids are in some ways a little more sophisticated than the picture book audience on certain things. So this from Thunder and Cluck, you have Cluck inventing the game of tag. Okay. And it's just such a funny joke to me because they're dinosaurs. So of course no one's ever played tag. And he's like, I call it tag. And I just think kids are gonna love that because they all know what tag is. And they're like, oh, the dinosaurs invented tag. It's just so funny. And I'm not sure like a 4-year-old would get that joke, but a 6-year-old would. And that's just the difference in that sophistication of kids when they're in sort of first grade, late kindergarten to first grade, and they're starting to do these easy readers. And then here's another, but I think this is really interesting. So we've got Cluck calling it tag. And then in another scene, Cluck creates a fulcrum and a lever to get Thunder out of quicksand, to help get him out of quicksand. And he says, tell me, my smart friend, what do you call that lifter thingy you made? Lifter thingy, which I think is also really funny because kids probably won't know what a fulcrum or a lever is yet because they haven't gotten to that concept in their math classes or their, whatever classes they teach that in. But they all know what tag is. So having him use the word tag, but here just called a lifter thingy, I think is really intuitive and brilliant and fits the audience and kids. It allows the readers to feel really smart about this subtle humor, which I love. So Jill, I wanted to give you kudos for that. And did you think that through when you were writing it? Or again, was this just sort of instinct on your part to call one tag and call the other one lifter thingy?
Well, when you turn the page after he says, I call it tag, Thunder says, I call it hunting. And then he chases him, which has the same effect as he wanted. Anyway,
Sure.
the lifter thingy just kind of came out and I thought, what would Cluck call it? I mean, I don't want to use anything sophisticated.
No.
And it'd be funnier if you just said a lifter thingy.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's perfect.
He's
it's perfect. Yeah.
I learn things about them as we go. He turns out
Sure.
he invents a lot of little goofy
He invents things. And that's just so great because of course he would be the first one ever to do this because he lived so long ago. I mean, it totally makes sense for the character, which I very much love. And then Lola with here's a couple, these are 4 pages, 1, 2, 3, 4 from inside the Sprinkles and Swirls book. And you can see here that this is a little bit of a different kind of humor. It's very sweet. It's very realistic. And it's kind of just the relationship that first of all, these 2 sisters have with each other. And then they're on the bumper cars and, they get bumped from behind from these other kids. And they're like, they're getting away, not for long. It's a very realistic, fun, action-packed scene that feels, I imagine a lot of kids will be like, oh, I did that. That's exactly the way it was when I did it. So I love that you can have very different kinds of stories within this same level of reading. And it just gives you so much creative freedom, I think, as a writer. To create the tone you want. I think it's very clear that these 2 books have different tones and they're both very, very appealing in each way, in whatever tone they have. That was a long monologue by me. I had a question in there. I just love analyzing books. But as far as sort of the tone, the humor, anything like that, again, is that something that just sort of organically starts to develop as you're creating these characters and writing these stories.
Absolutely. And just like Jill said, the more we write with these characters, the more we discover about them.
Mhm.
So as you said initially, Laura, that Sprinkles is more or less the ringleader, the dominant one. And she remains that in book 1 and 2. And Swirls is always just a little bit hesitant, but then you want to surprise your reader. You don't want to just have them typecast that way and never have any changes. So in the second book, where they're at a pool and splash pad and a lazy river and all those kinds of wet things for a day, it turns out that Sprinkles is extremely afraid to go off the diving board. And here comes Swirls saying, no, just shut your eyes and go for it. And she takes, you know, a running leap with her eyes shut and does a cannonball into the pool and just about empties it out. But every now and then you have to do that because we're all different like that too. Sure, we have some dominant personality traits, but every now and then we do surprise the people we love or our best buddies. And so it is fun for us, the writers, to have our characters surprise us. And then in book 3, it's a talent show. And actually, Swirls leads the way and Sprinkles just doesn't believe she has any talent. And it's so difficult for her. So their friendship is constantly trying to help the other one, but they also have this rivalry, you know, like I'll drive. No, I'm going to drive. So truth be told, I have to tell you that I had a very simple surgery right before I was writing this particular script. And I called up, and it was during the pandemic, but I found a fun park that was open, and we went when it literally opened in the morning. We were the only ones there. And so we did all these kinds of things. And so if you feel it's relatable, it's because my friend and I, you know, we got out there and we went in the go-karts, the bumper cars. We were having a blast in this place because there were a gazillion things to do, and we were the only ones there doing it. So, you know, that's how, in a way, I tried to channel our friendship into these gals.
That's great. I love that. That sounds like a perfect day to be the only ones in the fun park and have it all to yourself. That is awesome. That's awesome. Jill, did you have anything to add before I move on? I'm going to stop sharing the screen here too.
Good.
Okay. So, whoops, I don't want to do that. No, no, no.
This is such a pretty book. It looks like ice cream. You know, doesn't it look like candy or ice cream or something?
It does look
it
delicious.
does. It's so pretty.
Siobhan was right. It does look delicious.
It does look delicious, and I'm like, no, there you cannot eat the characters in the book, but they look so tasty. So my last question, and then we'll move on to some questions from people here. Lola, you've written a lot of other easy readers that are not in the graphic novel format. So how different is that process for you? Because you are writing not just the dialogue, but the whole story.
Well, you think about it, at least I think about it differently. So when I was writing like Loose Tooth or the Mittens series or any of those, I was writing a much shorter story. Definitely every single word counts. Not that they don't in a graphic, they certainly do. But I kind of feel like with the graphic, because of the length, I can let loose and have a little bit more fun with it, where you're more or less walking a tightrope with just a regular easy reader, because you do have to have all the elements of story development in there. You have to have that satisfying ending, and yet you don't have a lot of room for all that extra language to do it. So for me, this has been great fun. And I have to admit that I would like to write more and more. I think it's great that I've done these 3, but and again, I just think that children will really enjoy them. And you know how, Laura, you were saying at the beginning, when you showed from both of our books, how the characters were telling the reader how to read the panels from left to right and then up to down. They did that because initially, when some of the early graphic books that were tremendous stories came out like 8 years ago, 7 years ago, and I watched this in schools, kids were excited about them, but they didn't know how to read them. And they got very confused trying to figure out how they were to map that out. And so it's not just ready to read, but I've noticed that other publishers are doing the same thing with this introduction about how to read them, because they are a different duck for young children. So I don't know if that answers your question. I just feel like it's a little bit, I know this sounds odd, but a little bit more difficult to write a regular easy reader, because you do have to watch which language you use, and again, relying heavily on sight words, and yet tell this whole compelling story in just a few spreads.
Right. Yes, you do. And I imagine you're still thinking along the lines of a story that takes place in a short period of time for the most part, a simple plot line, lots of action. I imagine there's a lot of dialogue as well within a regular easy reader, because it does break up the text on the page nicely. It gives a lot of white space around the text. Is that something that you think about when you're writing the non-graphic novel easy readers?
Jill?
I haven't. I really haven't. I've written a series, but it's only going to a meeting in January. So, you know.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
fingers crossed. Yeah.
Probably not as graphic. So,
Okay. Well, we will.
but I did not have any parameters either for that. So, word.
Okay. Well, fingers crossed on that one. Okay. Well, let me get to some of the questions here. Don't want to keep us over the hour here. So we have one question here. Is level, as in level 1 for these readers, synonymous with the grade? And again, that depends on the publisher a lot, but generally no, it's just the earliest level of reader. Is that correct in the series?
I know their usual ready to read series has 5 different levels. And the graphics, those start at level 1. Is that correct, Lola?
Yes.
What you know? And I had no choice in the matter. I didn't know what it was going to be. I assumed it'd be a 2 or a 3, but they said 1. And I said, oh, what does that mean? They said, take out all the contractions. And I said, oh, darn it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not as easy as it sounds either. Sometimes you had to come at a sentence a whole different way, or it sounded too stiff, you know.
Oh yeah, I bet. Yeah.
It's kind of challenge that writers like. So
yeah. I know that these publishers that have these leveled series, they have a lot of information on their websites. So you can go look up the particular line. Simon Schuster, Random House, Scholastic, they all have leveled readers, and they will describe in great detail what each level is.
Right.
So that gives you a lot of good information. Susan asks, can you give suggestions on how to pitch the graphic novel to an editor? So do both of you have agents? Did you first have your agent then submit it to the editor? Is that how that worked? Jill's saying yes, Lola.
Well, I did not write a pitch for this one, so I cannot tell you.
I didn't either. And yes, I haven't. Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry, hon.
No.
Yes, I have an agent, but in this case, Siobhan and I were talking about something else. And she said, by the way, would you like to take a stab at writing these? And I said, yes, yes, yes. And then, like I said earlier, that's when I would work on some other characters and some other scripts that didn't work. So there was no pitch. I just sent her things to see if this was something she was interested in. But, you know, when you write a pitch, I've got some easy readers here from other publishers as well. But if you just look, like even on any bookseller site that describes the book, so here's like Fitz and Cleo, you want to write your pitch like jacket copy, or like that cute brief description that the publisher writes about the book. And that's what they're eager to look at, something that's got energy and pops on the page. And it isn't exactly a description of the entire story, not by any means. It's a lure. And so I would highly recommend, if someone is going to write a pitch, that you do that. You either look at jacket copy, or you go on different bookseller sites and look at that short description that the publisher came up with, and it's usually no more than 2 or 3 sentences, that is just saying to the reader, come here, I know you're going to like this. Think about this. And that's really, and again, type them up, type those up, because something organic happens that as you're typing these, the pacing of it, the word choice, all of that, you start to internalize it and it really helps you.
That's true. That's very, very true. And really the pitch is not so much centered on the format. So not so much all about it being a graphic novel. It's about the story and the characters, correct? And then after you give that little synopsis or hook or, in your pitch, then you can say, this is a graphic novel, or in the next paragraph. And then usually you will be attaching the manuscript or at least a couple pages. I imagine most, for these easy reader ones, they'll probably take the entire manuscript with the pitch. So
I have a tip. One person who said she hated to turn down Thunder and Cluck, but she had already asked for too much that year. And she said that they also had too many duos in this format. So if you can come up with, a single character and interacting with a lot of other characters along the way, or a trio, or,
I heard this too from my agent. She said that she has been hearing from editors, no more twos. And for a lot of different formats, not just the easy reader, but for a lot of other formats too. They just seem to have gotten inundated with that.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Well, it's easy to take 2 very disparate characters and have them play off of each other, that's.
Right.
Well, and for the easy reader and even early chapter book age, those friendship stories are so important because kids are making those first really strong friendships at that age. And so it's important to them. And I can see why so many books center around that. But that is a really, really good tip to know. So thank you.
And one of the editors told me that for this very young age, she likes sweet or sassy. I thought that was a great way to kind of bring in your thinking. And another editor who does easy readers and graphic easy readers told me, we have no child characters right now. And I would really like to see.
They're all animals?
Yeah, they're all animals or robots or different kinds of things. And I started looking and I thought, she's right. I don't see any children. So writers out there, think about those single kid characters that you could develop.
Okay. Good tip. You heard it here first because you came live. So good for you, people who are listening. You can jump on it. So a couple questions here. I'm going to pull them together, asking about how you see this particular format, age group, etc., expanding in the future. First of all, we have one person asking if you think graphic novels, are going to remain popular. And I mean, it seems that way just with their popularity now. Everything in publishing is cyclical. 10 years from now, who knows what people are going to be wanting. But I imagine the format, as far as what are you seeing? And the two of you, I know you go to conferences, you talk to editors, agents. Are you seeing this as something that's going to stick around for a while?
Right now, it feels like it's exploding, but like everything else, it will reach a saturation point eventually.
Oh, yeah.
But who knows? That could be 10 years down the road.
Yes, exactly. Or they'll morph. We'll have another format that we haven't even thought of yet,
Right. But I think that we're going to see, and I know of a couple publishers that are already going in this direction. I think we're going to see more nonfiction done for this young reader in graphic form. And I think it's going to be exciting the way the presentations will come about. So I think that, yes, if it's somebody trying to look down the road a year or two, you might consider nonfiction in this kind of format.
I agree completely. That's a great thing to think about. In fact, we had one person in the chat box early saying they were working on a nonfiction historical graphic novel. So that's
Smart.
great. Do you include words like sound words in the manuscript, like zoom, bump, those kinds of things that aren't necessarily in the dialogue? Are those things that you write, or does the illustrator throw those in?
Both.
I put them in there. I wanted to ask Jill about her when when Cluck was coming out of the quicksand. It was Scrooge.
Oh yeah, I was afraid I couldn't get away with those because they are very specific, hard to pronounce words, and they didn't say a word.
Yeah, I love that one. I
Oh,
looked at that
yeah.
one. I thought, oh, this is
Fortune,
brilliant.
yeah.
Well, and it's part of the illustration, and it's clear what's happening. And I think, yeah, I could see where it would work not in the dialogue, but in the illustration. I can see where you could get away with it. Yeah, that was great. It was great. Do you ever include in your text transitions like the next day, that kind of thing?
You
Or is it
can.
just dialogue?
No, it doesn't have to be just dialogue.
Okay.
I just did it that way. She told me go ahead and write anything like that that you need, between to transition between scenes or something. And I have not yet.
Okay, terrific.
And there are some books out from some publishers right now that are heavy on narrative, but are still graphic presentations. They have redone all of the Scaredy Squirrel. And if you look at those in the graphic format, most of it is narrative. I just thought that was fascinating. So again, really study the market, folks, because anything and everything goes, but you have to, if you're going to target a house, you have to know what they appreciate the most.
Right.
And
right.
this is where it's good to read everything you can about an editor who may be in charge of an imprint. I mean, if she loves cats, you've got a leg up on everybody that hasn't read about her. Or if she loves cupcakes or dinosaurs,
right?
Do your homework.
Very, very good. So it's like any other kind of writing. Basically,
Yes.
read a lot of it and follow the editors who are acquiring this kind of manuscript and see what they like. It's just like any other niche or genre. Absolutely. We have several questions about word count, and I know you guys have said you don't really worry too much about that, but do you have a general idea? And of course, if you've added notes to the illustrator, that's going to
Oh yeah, those
the
will
word
count.
count. Yeah, that doesn't really count, but I don't know if you do a word count on your manuscript, if it throws those in, and so you wouldn't know
But if somebody
exactly.
wants to read mine and count all the words, you can let me know. I have no idea where they ended up.
I've got to think under 500 words, I mean, even,
I don't think so.
no?
I think mine's longer than that.
Okay.
Yeah, the graphic ones run longer. And just like you said, Laura,
Yeah, that's true.
when I see a total word count, it's including all my
Sure.
illustrative suggestions. So, but if you're doing a regular easy reader, level 1 or level 2, they can be 70 words to like 200 words. And that's what I was saying. That's really walking a tightrope to tell a compelling story.
Sure.
With so few words. But when it gets into the graphic, again, because you might have 2 panels, you might have 3 panels on one page, you have a lot more room. So I would say write a really good story and not worry about your word count. Yeah, it cannot be 4,000 words. It can't be that. But if it's 700 to 900 and that includes your illustrative notes or suggestions, feel comfortable with that.
Well, and what people can do is get your books and type them out, as you have suggested several times. Just type the actual dialogue, and then you'll know how long they are. And you'll get a good sense of, the flow and the word choices and all of those things. Well, I'm going to let you go. This has been just wonderful, but I didn't know if either of you had any parting words of wisdom that you want to leave our viewers with, who are interested in writing graphic novels for early readers, beginning readers.
Think about your audience and make your story relatable. So if you are kind of trying to write a level 1 or level 2, think of how old those emergent and early readers are. What are they interested in? What are their triumphs? What are their challenges? And have some of that in your text, because that is what's going to appeal. And I am really impressed that these editors that publish or edit the easy readers or the graphics, they know their audience very, very well. So if you're going to submit something, you need to know your audience that well too, and have fun with it. Have the kind of fun writing it that you're hoping the reader will take away.
Terrific. Thank you. Jill, do you have anything to add to that before we leave?
No, my biggest piece of advice is read all you can. There will be 60 to 70% that you don't even want to finish because they don't appeal to us necessarily.
Right.
A lot of them. When I, got big stacks, I thought some of them, I just kept going, what, why? Or I'd start reading, I think, nope, I just don't get into these characters. So that's why it's important to write your own from your own heart.
Sure.
And your own sense of humor, and type them out. The ones that you connect with, type those puppies out, and that will help you so much get a feel for the sentence structure and the complexity or simplicity. Just really, really, there's nothing more helpful than that.
Terrific. Well, thank you. I'm going to go back to the slide with both your websites on it. I want everybody to be sure to check out all your books and everything else on your websites, because they're both amazing. So thank you both so much for being here tonight. This was wonderful, and I learned a lot. I know everybody else did too. So we really appreciate your time tonight.
For having us.
Thank you, Laura. It was great fun.
It was fun.
It was fun. So thank you. And thank you all for being here tonight. And happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I won't see you till December. So enjoy the holiday, and we will see you in, I don't know, around 3 weeks, something like that, for first Tuesday in December. So, all right.
Thanks,
Good night,
Laura.
everybody.
Good night.
Night.